Hi everybody, want to welcome you to the first inaugural wood turning, whatever you want to call it, symposium, class, whatever. This is all new to me, even though I do work with a lot of the wood whisperer guys online a lot of the times. Simulcasting tonight on two different sites, the Wood Whisperer at woodwhisperer.com and the Wood Turners Resource website. So please stop by their sites. There's a lot of good info on both sites, and it's a lot of fun. Tonight we'll be talking about bowl turning 101, starting from the basics. We're going to talk a little bit about safety. We're going to talk a little bit about tooling. We're going to talk a little bit about sharpening. These are all going to go fairly fast. The tooling and the sharpening is probably going to be broken out at some point into another interactive to where we can get a little bit more in depth. After that, we're going to go into a little bit of blank prep, how to get your logs ready to go onto your machine. Then after we get through that, then it's going to be mounting the blank up onto the lathe. We'll turn the outside, we'll form the tenon, get the outside where we want it to be, and then we'll turn it around, put it into the chuck, and we'll work on doing the inside. I'd ask for you to not PM me directly tonight. Our moderator tonight, he's in both chat rooms, is Tim V. It's best to post your questions right directly into the respective chat rooms that you're in, and he can kind of guide them or guide me to the most pertinent ones for tonight, what we're doing. Tim's an accomplished turner, so he's really familiar with what we're doing tonight. My cameraman tonight is a friend of mine, a fairly new turner that lives just up the street from me. His name's Derek, so he's going to be running the camera and being my general gopher tonight. So with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I want to thank you all for coming. Should be an interesting night, and I hope everybody can take away at least one little tidbit of information. I'm sure there's some experienced turners in here just out of curiosity, and I know there's a lot of newer turners in here. So here we go. Safety is my first topic, and I want to touch on head and face safety first. At the very minimum, a pair of safety glasses is the absolute barest minimum that you should wear at the lathe. My personal feeling is a face shield is almost not enough. A face shield coupled with safety glasses is getting better. The only time I feel that you really don't need to wear a face shield is when you're sanding. You're sanding at low speeds. There's no danger of anything really coming off of the piece or off of the lathe and striking you in the face. With that said, I will be wearing a face shield tonight. I will be wearing a set of magnifier glasses, reading glasses beneath my face shield. So if I'm talking during the demo, it might sound a little bit muffled. It's because I will be wearing a face shield. I always wear a face shield when I turn. I never turn without one. It's a very rare occurrence if I turn without one. Another big thing that I'm a big proponent of as much as possible is I work typically with bigger sections of logs. My lathe will throw 24-inch piece of wood. That's a big piece of wood. It takes a little bit of more thought when you're working with big wood like that to keep your body out of the line of fire. If something goes awry while you're working on the piece, if an undetected piece of the wood comes off that's loose because of ring shake or wind shake, where's it going to go when it comes off? It's going to go in the line of the rotation of the piece one way or the other. It's either going to go up or out, either front or back. There's no way of guessing. If your body happens to be standing in front of the rotation of the bowl when it lets go, you're going to get struck with it. Just this year, earlier this year, we had a lady that was killed in by a bowl that exploded. I believe it was a segmented bowl. Struck her in the head. She survived a couple of days afterwards and died of her injuries. So please be mindful when working with wood on a lathe that there are certain risks. You can get your fingers pinched, get them caught, get them crushed, can be struck by something coming off of the lathe. So always try and think ahead, try and keep your body out of the line of fire, and try and keep your head out of the line of fire as much as possible. So that covers a little bit of safety. We're going to go right into the tooling. For turning bowls, we use bowl gouges. We don't use spindle roughing gouges. A spindle roughing gouge looks like this. This is a big spindle roughing gouge. This is an 1.25 inch spindle roughing gouge. You can see how it's attached to the handle. It's just a tang. There was a really good discussion going on in the Wood Whisperer forum right now in the turning section about, it was a video that I posted from another turner off of YouTube, and he was demoing why you don't use a spindle roughing gouge on bowls. These are only designed to be used with spindles. That's with a spindle with the grain orientation parallel with the ways of the lathe, running the length of the lathe, not cross grain like a bowl orientation is. The tang is very brittle. If you get a severe catch, the tang can come off. The metal part of the chisel can come up and strike you in your body if you're standing in front of it. So this is a spindle tool, not a bowl tool. The bowl tools that I typically use for my work run anywhere from, when I'm doing my bigger work, I use a 3/4 inch bowl gouge, and I go all the way down to a 3/8 bowl gouge, and all the sizes in between, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 5/8, and 3/4. I do 2 basic grinds on my bowl gouge. I do a fingernail grind, and that looks something like this. This will be the top of the gouge. This is the bottom of the gouge. That's a bad representation. And here's the bevel coming back. Here's the flute, the inside of the flute. I use what's commonly referred to as an Ellsworth type grind, a fingernail grind. There's many, many different kinds of variations on this same grind. It originally, I think, was called an Irish grind when it first started to become popular. The second bowl gouge that I use is just a conventionally ground bowl gouge. And it's sharpened like this. Where this is the bevel here, you'll have a very short wing. I got to get my art right for you to make it make sense. There, my art is fairly close with that. Something like that. 2 different applications. They both remove wood. They're both used a little bit differently, at least for me. I'm pretty much a proponent of the Bill Grumbine way. I know some of you will be familiar with Bill Grumbine and his teaching methods. Some of you likely have never heard of him or have never seen his videos. I'm going to try and teach his video or his methods tonight to you. For massive stock removal, I use only the fingernail grind gouge. I can remove a lot of material. I can take a shaving that is almost the full width of my bevel on each and every pass. The conventional gouge, I use that as a finishing tool on the inside of the bowl only. It's generally ground on the conventional grind gouge. I generally can grind that from 45 to 85 degrees. To do that, I've got a protractor. Give me a protractor. I've got a protractor, and I set the flat table on my grinder to whatever angle that I want. Every turner needs one of these. It's a protractor made by General. You can get them at Home Depot, Ace Hardware, wherever. It's good to set your nose angle. That way you just touch your nose up against there to get it to the grind that you want. And then it's just a matter of just a strict rolling motion. It's all linear. It just rolls on its own axis back and forth to achieve this grind, this conventional grind. Typically, you'll never see me use a gouge ground like this conventionally at 40 degrees. I'll be either 50 to 55 degrees on up to 80 to 85 degrees, depending. And that'll become more apparent as we get a little bit deeper. Now, the standard bowl gouge, I grind all mine at 60 degrees. Plain and simple. I've tried 40, I've tried 50, I've tried 55. Never gone really past 60. I've seemed to have hit a happy medium with how everything works at 60. Grinding and sharpening, that's like a holy grail for some of us turners. We like sharp tools. We like to cut wood cleanly. Everybody hates to sharpen though, but it's a necessary evil. If you're getting a bunch of tear out, the tool's starting to get hard to push, stop and sharpen. New turners, I find, are always trying to use dull tools. They never sharpen often enough. I'm a very big proponent of the Wolverine system made by One Way. The VariGrind 1, the original VariGrind, is the most common sharpening system that turners use now. When you buy the Wolverine sharpening jig, it comes with two bases, a V-arm, and a flat platform. That's the basic kit, and then you add in the VariGrind. They also offer a skew sharpening attachment, which has very little worth as far as I'm concerned. It just doesn't seem to perform well for me. Other people may use it and just love it. But I highly suggest to look into some type of jig sharpening. There's other options other than the VariGrind and the Wolverine jig. You can home make a jig. There's plans on the internet that you can locate. They're really detailed. Hopefully I've got a set of plans that I'm going to try and get up somewhere. Maybe I'll put them in the different turning forums for a VariGrind type jig. Does the same job. We'll get you a grind like the fingernail grind up here. But sharpen often. If you're not sharpening at least once every 10 minutes, you're probably not sharpening enough. You're trying to push your tools way too far. And then you hear a lot of people talk about, well, should I get a V gouge? Should I get a U gouge? What gouge actually should I get? A V gouge is shaped kind of like this. It's kind of a little bit of an exaggeration. A U gouge has a much broader flute in the bottom of it. They both behave a little bit differently. Some guys say, oh, V gouge is the best for removing a lot of wood as it won't clog. Other guys say, well, no, the U gouge is the best because I can push cut with it. You know, I own both. I own both V gouges and U gouges. I don't do push cuts typically, except on the interior of a bowl, and everybody does push cuts. I use them both, plain and simple. It's basically personal preference. I think probably a V gouge probably has a little bigger following than what a U gouge does. So all I can say is, you know, you just have to try them and come up with that. Find a good angle. You can sharpen this conventional, or not conventional, but the Irish grind. It can be sharpened anywhere from 40 to 45 degrees all the way up to 80, 85 degrees, and anywhere in between. A lot of guys have multiple gouges, and they'll have one gouge ground at 45, something ground at 50 or 55, something ground at 60 or 65, all the way on up to 80 or 85. Each different grind angle has a different job. As long as we're talking about that, I can touch on that real easy. When you've got a big bowl, provided it's a fairly open form on your bowl, so you've got a big bowl, and it's a fairly open form on your bowl, you can get by with a lesser bevel on the heel of your gouge. Because as you're coming through, you're starting here. Actually, I should have drawn it up like this. Your gouge is going to be coming in here like this, and you always want to ride the bevel. So it's fine because you got your, here's the ways of the lathe are running this way. It's fine when you get the gouge started and you're working down through the cut, but when you come to this transition area, if you've only got a 40 or 45 degree bevel on your gouge, when it comes to this transition area, by the time your gouge gets up to here, you're actually going to be hitting, you'll be fine with that on this. You make the transition, come around the curve, and you can finish all the way to the bottom on a nice open form like this. But if you take this form and you deepen it, deepen this form, now that same 45 degree angle that you had on that gouge, once you get down here like this, it's not going to, you're going to be hitting the side of the bowl. So if we use a 60 degree or 70 degree or 80 degree gouge, what it does is using a steeper bevel grind on your gouge, it's going to push the handle way out here like this. And this is, the bevel is almost going to be like that. So it's going to be a little harder to get it started in here because it's such a shallow grind on it. But when you get it up into here, this is going to let you make this turn much, much easier and get across this transition, because this is the transition area right here. When you hear turners talk about the transition, it's the point where the sidewall of the bowl becomes the bottom of the bowl. All that area right in this curve is called the transition area. You're cutting side grain, end grain, side grain, end grain as the bowl comes around. Your grain runs this way, up and down in the bowl. Grain runs this way. So as every rotation, you're cutting 2 pieces of side grain, 2 pieces of end grain, 2 pieces of side grain, 2 pieces of end grain. When you get into this transition, it starts changing a little bit. You start picking up more end grain cuts and less of the side grain cuts. So this is a problem area, getting through the transition and into the bottom of the bowl and making a nice smooth bottom, a consistent bottom. How are we doing on questions? Do we have any questions? Any questions so far, guys, on anything that I've covered?
Close up of the turning gouges.
You want a close up of the gouges? Okay. Now you have to understand, when I grind my gouges, let me draw a gouge again up here real quick. Yeah, if you can keep an eye on that kind of, Derek, for me, I'd appreciate it. This is a conventional gouge, or no, it's a fingernail gouge, and it gets ground like this. Anything that's below 1/8 of an inch from the edge, you don't need it. So when I show you these gouges, you're going to see these gouges, and you're going to see this whole bottom is gone. My gouge looks like that. All I need is enough bevel to carry that edge, and it only takes a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. Everything else, this wing would be gone, this line delineating that, grinding that wing would be gone, and it's rounded. This whole gouge is rounded in profile. I do that for one reason. It's because when I'm making that turn in the transition area, that I don't get any bruising from the heel of the gouge. If I were to leave the heel on that gouge, if I was to leave this heel on the gouge like that, Every time I go through a curve, this bevel rides up a little bit, and then this heel jumps over that little bump each time. Boom, 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 and it just continues all the way down the inside of a bowl. By grinding this away, you take this heel out of play. It allows you to make a much smoother cut through the bottom. Did everybody get to see that? The way I've got that relief cut? And I do this on just about all of my bowl gouges, except for something I'm using for just massive stock removal. And I do it on all of my spindle gouges. You'll see when you start sanding and finishing your bowls, you'll see these lines in the bottom of them. And you're going, what the heck is that in the bottom of my bowl? I can't sand it out. It won't sand out. Well, 90% of the time, it's going to be bruising from the corner on the bevel, from your gouge, from that bevel dragging through that wood. If you grind and relieve that back, like I said, all you need is a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch of actual bevel up here to support the cut. Everything else is just mass there. That's on the fingernail grind. This is my conventional grind gouge. I do the same exact grind on that. Just roll it out, get rid of it all. Get rid of everything except for a little bit right at the bevel. Everybody see that clearly?
Does rounding it make the bevel riding the bevel more difficult?
No, not at all. I can one-hand cut with that short little bevel like that, the same as I can one-hand cut with the full-length bevel. It helps you in the finish aspect more than anything because you don't get the bruising when you round that bevel like that. I think if you've got more than one bowl gouge and you can play with it, I think if you take one and you grind it conventionally, you grind it conventionally with just a regular bevel, and you compare that to one that you've relief cut, you'll see a big difference in the finish on the interior bowls, at least with the bruising. And on the softer hardwoods like cherry and some of the softer ones, walnut and stuff like that, it becomes really apparent because cherry bruises from heel bruises real easy. So I suggest it's something you should play with. May not be for everybody. It works very well for me though, because you get those bruises in there and they're pretty near impossible to get sanded out. You'll be in there with 60 grit and 80 grit forever and a day trying to get them all out. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one, chucks. I'm not going to do a real lot with chucks tonight. There's two basic types of chucks, big chucks and little chucks. Little chucks are Vicmarks, the Novas, but Novas come out with a bigger one, 5-inch. I consider a little chuck anything 3 inches and under. A big chuck is a 5-inch chuck. One Way makes a Stronghold. Nova makes a Titan, I believe it is. Vicmark makes a 120. Those are all 5-inch chucks for bigger work. You got two different types of jaws. You got dovetail jaws and you have square jaws. Dovetail jaws are just what the name implies. When you got a bowl, you're going to put a tenon on the bottom of the bowl. This tenon's not a... I'm going to change how I draw the picture because I like to do my tenons just a little bit different. That's a dovetail tenon. If you look at the profile on your jaws, here's the bottom plate of your jaw, and you've got the actual jaw coming up like this, and it's got just a little point sticking out of it like that. That's a dovetail jaw. The important thing when you use a dovetail jaw, this area, the side of the tenon to the bottom of the bowl, it's very important to be 90 degrees.
They're asking, what do you think of the Easy Wood for new turners?
Easy Wood tools? Oh man, I knew somebody was going to go there. I do have some Easy Wood tools. The only thing I use it for is to form a tenon, a square-sided tenon. I think newer turners need to learn how to use conventional tools first. That's my personal belief. The skills that you're going to learn using conventional gouges and spindle gouges will be invaluable to you. There's a lot of things that an Easy Wood tool can't do that you can do with bowl gouges and spindle gouges. So I'm in the school where develop your skills first, get to know your tooling first and how to handle it. Then if you want to branch out and buy some easy wood tools or get into the other carbides that are available, that's fantastic. But I'm a firm believer in truthfully learning the conventional tools first. Okay, back to the tenon. It's really, really important that the bottom of the bowl to the shoulder of the tenon be 90 degrees. All your strength from a dovetail jaw comes from the top of the jaw and this interface here and the dovetail. That's where all your holding power comes from. You never want the bottom of the tenon here. Never you want the bottom of the tenon to touch the bottom plate of the jaw. So if you've got a ½ inch, from the top of the jaw to the plate of the jaw, you want to make your tenon 3/8 to 7/16 long. You never want to bottom that tenon out. The one-way chucks, as far as I know, are the only chucks that use just a square tenon without a dovetail, and it's the same thing. It's just without a dovetail. I like to take, and I use an Easy Woods tools. I got a C10 or something like that. A CI2 Easy Woods tools. And I form a square 90-degree corner in here, and then I reground a skew to match the dovetail angle on my chucks, and I sneak in there and I put in about 1/8 of an inch dovetail right up in there. You want it flat, you want it to seat sound. So that's how I make mine. Like I say, if you got a one-way chuck, they're just a square. They're just a square tenon. Nothing special about that, but it is important that, just like the other one, you want to make it 90 degrees. Okay? Anything else?
Right now.
Okay. Blank prep. Everybody's favorite question when you're a newer turner. How do I cut my blanks? And this is good to know. I was just watching today, I was watching Mike Mahoney and Stuart Batty doing, I think the title of it is called Two Bowls, Two Different Ways. And they got to talking about their wood choices. Professional turners use the trunks of trees. They go up to where the first branches are, cut the top of the tree off there, and all they're using is clear, clean wood from the bottom of the tree. But as us hobbyists and turners in that, we tend to use trees that have a bunch of branch wood. So you got this tree coming up here, great big old tree, a couple of branches sticking out, meet here. The professional turners cut it off here, and this is what they use. They use the trunk. We're left a lot of times with using branch wood. In the trunk of the tree, the pith, which is the actual center of the tree, it's where the tree grows from. It's the bullseye in the middle of the wood. That's the pith. That generally in the trunk section will grow straight up the middle of the tree. When it gets to a branch, it comes from the center of the tree and it hugs, the pith generally hugs the top of the branch section. And that causes two different types of wood in branches. It causes reactionary wood. Well, what's reactionary wood? Well, the weight of the limb hanging down off of the tree causes this bottom portion from the pith down to become compression wood. That's compression wood, so it's on the bottom of the branch, on the fatter half. If we took this as a branch section instead of the trunk section, and we moved this pith up here, so now, down here, here's your compression wood. And here's your, I can't think of the term, I lost it right off the top of my head. Reaction, we'll just call it reaction wood. There's a different term that I lost right off the top of my head. And you're going to say, well, why does that matter to me? Well, if you were to take this branch blank and you were to cut it like this and include reaction wood and a compression wood in that bowl blank, that's going to cause that blank to dry and deform much, much differently, rather than if you were to cut it horizontally through that pith. The drying action of the bowl, when it has all the same type of wood, either the reaction or the compression wood, is much more predictable than that. So it's always preferable when you're cutting blanks, and sometimes you can't avoid it, or sometimes there's some figure or something in the wood that you're chasing and you just can't get it centered very nicely. It's always preferable to keep like woods together. So if this was my branch and I was cutting it for a bowl blank, that is how I would cut it. I would cut it horizontally, right through the pith, or as close to the pith as I can. I have all the compression wood down here, and I have all the other wood up here. And that does another thing. That gives me a nice big bowl blank down here, and it gives me a smaller bowl blank up here. Got to remember, we're turning bowls, guys, and I know most everybody tries to sell a few here and there. The big blank is worth the most amount of money. So the bigger the blank, the more you can charge for it. So that's how I prep wood. Never, when you're cutting wood, especially if you're splitting it out in the field, I try and split it right through the pith. If the pieces are smaller and I can bring them home and work with them, that's fine. I've got a great big bandsaw. I can cut them and get rid of the pith. If this was big wood, say 24, 26, 30-inch wood, what I would likely do is, rather than cutting it like that with the pith right there, I would take a slab out of that, like that, with the pith enclosed in that slab, and that slab goes in the garbage then. If you leave the pith in a piece of wood, it's 99% sure that it will crack from that pith. You need to get the pith out. Anybody that's done any turning at all with any kind of green wood, or even some dry woods that have the pith in it, or even sometimes a knot, cracks will generate from the pith very quickly. So that's my recommendations on breaking down wood. When I'm breaking down trunk sections, I try and do the same thing, even if the pith is more centered in the log. I'm always looking to make my bigger blank. Which way is going to give me my bigger blank? In the trunk of the tree, it don't matter. I want the bigger bowl. If the pith is off center in the trunk of the tree, I still want the bigger bowl. So there's no hard and fast rules. The only one that I would highly recommend is to keep the like wood, the compression wood on branch wood, all in the same blank. Keep the reaction wood or the top wood all in its own blank, and try and not mix the two. It'll save you a lot of grief and heartache. Okay. Give me the stack of templates on the box there, please. So now you went out and you bandsaw, or you chainsawed all your wood, you brought it all home. Every bowl turner should have a set of these. They are nothing more than 1/4-inch hardboard templates with every bowl size that'll fit your lathe. 9, 10, 11, 13, all the way up to whatever size wood you can get. They're real easy to make, and it'll save you a heck of a lot of time. So earlier today I split a log, or I had a split log. I'm going to show you how I lay it out, and we'll take you over to the bandsaw, and I'll just give you a real quick demo on that. Any other questions before I walk away from the board? Okay. Gotta point it way down here. You can spin the monitor too so you can see it. You good?
Yep.
Okay. So here's one of my Masonite templates, 12-inch template. I've already got it pretty well set up for what we're doing. I bring my half logs down. I had split these at the wood yard the day that we cut them. So when I got them home, I sealed them up with Greenwood sealer. Anchor seal is what it's called. You get it from a website called UC Coatings, Coatings. You can order single gallons. They're about $15 or $16 a gallon, maybe a little more in single gallons. 5-gallon pails are like 85 bucks.
81 shipped.
$81 shipped. It's good to have extra on hand. It goes a long way, and it will help you save your green wood if you're green wood turner. And you do not want to use the new Anchor Seal tool. You want to use the original Anchor Seal 1. The 2 does not have the proven performance factor that the 1 has. But anyway, now I've got my half log. This happens to be soft maple, nice tree that we found at the wood dump. And I flip it on its backside. I want to look at the face, see what kind of shape the face is in. I already know that down here on the back corner I've got one branch clump that's coming into the side of it. So as much as possible, I know then at that point that I want to hug this far end of the blank. So I want to stay away as much of that branch and hopefully not have too many knots. Once I figure that all out, then I can flip it back over. And just using a simple screw and my screw gun, I can take and I throw the template back on my log. And I just tack it there. That's all. It's just loose. It's just sitting there. And all that is a guide for just running a bandsaw. And it's really simple. You just bring your blank in. Okay. Bring your blank in and just kind of run the blade around. And you just go all the way around the blank like that. Try not to cut the template up too much. If you do, it's only a piece of 1/4-inch hardboard. You just go make another template if it gets too dinged up. It don't have to be perfectly round. That's what we have a lathe for. For you guys that don't have the luxury of having a saw with a big throat, you want to try and get as much of the corners of this piece off as you can. Whether that means using a chainsaw, an electric chainsaw in your shop, a sawzall, a handsaw, a chisel and a mallet, whatever. You want to try and get it down to a closer of a round size. And that becomes real apparent when you put a piece like this, or conversely, a square piece like, you know, a half log on your lathe. You put something like that on your lathe and you're trying to rough it into a circle, it's going to beat you to death and it's going to take you forever. Because every time it spins around, you're going to be catching end grain twice. And it's going to beat you up. I'm going to show you a way to take some of the pain and misery out of roughing out some of these half logs. And it works very well. And you take a lot less abuse. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to mount up the piece that I made up onto the lathe. And we're going to go into turning if nobody's got any more questions. Got my water? Where did I go with my water? Gotta get a sip of water, guys. When I rough green wood, I generally end up with a truckload or more of it to work with. So once I have a basement shop, as you can pretty well tell down here. I don't have the luxury of having a ground floor shop. So speed is kind of the essence for me when I start roughing. I have a lot of wood to work down in a very short amount of time. I don't mess with face plates for roughing out bull stock. They have their place for large, very large, out of balance pieces that you just cannot get whipped into shape any other way. I'm a very big proponent on a woodworm screw. They can be purchased from many places. I think Supernova offers them. Vicmark includes one in their chucks. One Way even includes them in a chuck. All it is a real super heavy duty screw that mounts into one of your chucks. You drill a 1/4 or 3/16 inch hole on center. Mount your chuck on your lathe and thread the piece onto there. Makes for very quick, very efficient roughing. And you got to remember, we're not doing finish work at this point. We're just roughing wood. We're just removing waste to make a bowl shape. So I've already mounted this piece. This is just a piece of soft maple, 12 inches in diameter, just like what I just showed you over on the bandsaw. Might even be its brother. It all came out of the same tree, but you'll see the pro turners. They use screw chucks. They use face plates. I don't have big enough cojones to use a wormwood screw without using a tailstock. I don't know. I have a dedicated screw chuck where that is all it is. It's a fixed screw and a chuck that mounts right up to my spindle. I was roughing a big blank one day and it actually broke the screw. And my lathe weighs 850 pounds. I walked my lathe across my shop about 1.5 feet. Scared the devil out of me. So from that point on, I always use my tailstock. I recommend everybody use their tailstock. It's roughing. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to start pulling this bowl up from the bottom. You go, well, how come you're going to pull it up from the bottom? Well, if I was to put my tool rest in, push it up to the piece and grab my bowl gouge. And this is a big gouge. This is a 3/4 inch gouge. Every time this piece comes around, I'm cutting end grain. Boom. And I cut it there. I cut into end grain there. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Then I cut into end grain there. Then it's fine all the way through. It exits. And your tool is going to be doing this. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. In and out, in and out, in and out. If you take your tool rest, and I use a one-way curved tool rest. If you take your tool rest and you start on the tailstock side of the piece, and you start doing pull cuts, and I'll show you what a pull cut is. You start doing pull cuts and you start getting this piece flat and getting rid of all this extra stuff out here first. As you increase this flat area on the bottom of this bowl, I need a tenon that's going to be about 4.5 or so inches on this for my big chuck. So you're going to have this pretty well flat up to about this point to make that tenon work. Well, as you start coming out and you start pulling, you're going to lessen and lessen and lessen the amount of airspace that you're cutting in here in this area. And it's going to be a lot easier rather than taking the abuse trying to rough the outside of this out here. Because this is not cut perfectly round. I've got corners and flats on it all the way through. I don't even try and cut them perfectly round. If it's close when I'm cutting with the template, that's it. Another thing I like to turn with that I got directly from Bill Grumbine's video. He advocates what he calls a 45-45-45. And that means, considering that the lathe and the floor, the ways of the lathe and the floor are dead level, if you put your gouge on your rest and it's dead level, and it's parallel with the ways, back the camera up just a little bit, Derek, because they're going to have to see this. You may want to back up just a little bit more until they can get it. Okay, so I've got the gouge parallel with the floor, parallel with the ways. You want to swing this gouge out to about 45 degrees. Now, that's the first 45. The second 45 is you want to drop the handle of that gouge down to around 45 degrees. And you want to roll this gouge towards you over on its left-hand side. I'm a right-handed turner, so I turn right-handed. You left-handed guys, you can do the same thing, but you got to get back over here like this and do the same thing. and you're going to be doing more of a push cut type of motion to try and do it. But it's the same thing. Parallel with the floor, drop it 45 degrees, roll it on its side 45 degrees, and out like this. With that cut, and I'll be able to turn this piece probably at close to 400 RPM. It's 12-inch diameter. And I'll be taking just about full width wide shavings, which on this gouge is approaching an inch. When you're in the cut, sometimes you're only getting chips rather than streamers. It's a minor adjustment for you to go from making dust and little tiny chips to making streamers. Now this is in greenwood. So sometimes it's just a matter of rolling that gouge, excuse me, counterclockwise just a few degrees, or rolling it back clockwise just a few degrees to find that sweet spot in that gouge. And then it's just a matter of just pulling. Once you find that sweet spot, you want that gouge handle to be anchored on your hip. If you can't hold the handle at the very end, hold it where it's comfortable to you. Get it locked into your body. Make this solid. And use the major muscles of your body. Can they see me? You might have to back up the... Use the major muscles of your body to help pull that gouge through. Just going back and forth like that. I'm moving with my legs and my hips. I'm not moving out here with my hands right now like this. It's always preferable to use your core muscles on your body to help move the gauge. And you can see I'm set up pretty close to center line here. So I tend to cut a little bit above center, probably more so than a lot of people do. But I'm going to put the straight rest in right now. And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to demonstrate this 45, 45, 45 technique to you. Any questions so far?
No, we just don't use the regular screws.
Oh yeah. If you're mounting with a faceplate, you never use drywall screws. Use sheet metal screws. Drywall screws are too brittle. Anything generally with a square drive would almost be acceptable, unless they're a square drive drywall screw or decking screw or something like that. Best to use sheet metal screws to be safe.
And speed.
And speed. Speed for roughing. My lathe weighs 850 pounds, so I rough out probably a lot faster than what most people can. I should be able to rough out with this piece at around 400 RPM. If your lathe is dancing, one suggestion is to get some weight in it, as much weight as you can put in it. 200, 250, 300 pounds of sand is not unheard of for some of the lighter weight lathes. Get your speed down as low as you can get it. A lot of these newer lathes and the cheaper ones, some of the Grizzlies and some of the Jets and that, their low speed is 500 miles per hour. Now, if you put something like this on a lathe and spin it at 500 miles an hour, I can guarantee you, even with my big lathe, that it's going to walk. You need to get them as round as you can. Sometimes you got to lay the table on your bandsaw over and take a bevel cut when you're making this bowl and remove more of this heavier mass here in the big portion of the log and get it more cone shaped before you bring it to the lathe. So it's another consideration, or even take a chainsaw to it. Get it up here on the lathe, get an electric chainsaw in your shop. Take the chainsaw and shave some of this down. Get rid of some of this extra mass, because all this extra off balance mass is what's going to cause your lathe to walk. If your lathe starts walking, stay out of the way. Make sure everything's buttoned down real good, and hopefully you can get to the stop button. Yeah, 500 is pretty darn fast for a big bowl blank. It's too fast even for my lathe.
Let me get this straightened up a little bit. Turn sideways.
What's that?
Crook it a little bit.
The camera?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
There's a way to do that.
No, you just gotta. I tried to do it as best as I could this morning, so. How's that? Okay, so now that I got the straight tool rest in here, I'm going to work on this bark side, and I'm going to try and make this flat before I even start carrying out any of the curve of the bowl blank. So I'll put my glasses on, I'm going to put my face shield on. Remember, with this 45, 45, 45, it's a really easy technique to do. Try and get that gouge end, the end of the handle locked into your hip. And you just sit here and you just rock your body. Get your gouge up here close to the live center. Find your 45, 45, 45, and push in with the gouge. And once the nose is started, then you can pull back. That's right at 450 or so RPM right there. So here, my tool's on the rest. I dropped the handle. I've got it locked into my right hip. Push the gouge in so it starts to cut. Don't try and hurry through the cut. If you try and pull it out too fast like that, it don't allow the gouge enough time to cut. So it's just a nice, straight, even, right there, sweet spot. It's just a little bit of a roll. Straight back. That's all it is. My left arm, the bottom of my left arm is resting on my rest. That's a 12-inch rest. Most lathes come with them, I think, anymore. I rest my arm right on top of the rest. Get my gouge in there. Once I find that sweet spot, it's just a matter of rolling it one way or the other to find it. Like that. You can see now that I still got a lot of bark inclusion up here. I don't want any bark at all in my tenon area. So I'm going to get rid of all of that bark in the tenon area. Probably make another pass or two until it's all gone. And we'll see where it takes us. So I had to get started here in the center, I have to raise my handle up just a little bit. I've got the gouge rolled counterclockwise, about 45. Cutting with the nose. Now I can lower the handle, still keeping that sweet spot going. And out here, you're still getting an interrupted cut out here. You're getting an interrupted cut out here because you're coming out of solid wood into air, out of solid wood, into air, out of solid wood. But cutting like this is, you can do a pull cut like this because it treats it all like long grain. If you were to turn it around and try and cut from the outside going in, that's cutting straight into the end grain. And it's very, very counterproductive to cut like that in the end grain, and it generally doesn't cut very well. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to widen this out just a little bit more before I start pulling the bowl up. And I'm just going to make another, I'm going to move my tool rest up just a little bit. That's another thing. You want to try and keep your tool rest close to the lathe. This is a great big 3/4 inch diameter gouge, so I can have quite a bit of tool sticking out there. But to stick that much out, I generally have to have another 6 or 8 inches on the end of the handle. Again, same thing. Get it up there, get it close to the center. I'm not quite parallel to the floor right now. I got the nose up close. I'm just lightly pushing in with my right hand to get it to start cutting. Then as it cuts, then I'm rolling that gouge, trying to find that sweet spot. Once I find that sweet spot, then it's a nice easy pullback. It doesn't have to be anything fast. And that's plenty enough to make my tenon. I got probably 7 inches of white wood, nice wood there to make the tenon on. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to start pulling this form up. But I'm not going to start pulling the form from out here on the major diameter. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to start pulling that form up from the bottom. What it's going to do is it's going to get me into a more solid cut in the wood. It's going to support the bevel, and it's going to lessen the amount of airspace time that I'm cutting in here and having that interrupted cut. Same technique, 45, 45, 45. Drop the gouge handle 45, roll it 45, and 45 degrees to the ways of the lathe. And I'm just going to pull it out like that. But now I'm going to switch. I have a curved tool rest that I love to use for bowls. When I'm roughing greenwood, especially the bigger stuff, I core bowls. I'll get 2 out of a blank like this. I will get 2 additional bowl blanks out of this blank. Everybody knows not to move the rest when the lathe's on, right? Not a good practice. I do it all the time, but I'm always down here by myself, so it's no big issue for me. Anyway, remember, 45, 45, 45. I'm going to start up here. I know my tenon's going to be about from right there. Roughly, that's where my tenon's going to be. So I'm going to take my nose and my gouge, I'm going to stick it in there, drop it down 45, 45. And as I come through, you could see I'm cutting. When I started that cut and I was well into the wood, I had almost a 3/4 of an inch shaving. When I got out here to the closer to the major diameter of the bowl, I was only taking and cutting with about a 1/4 inch of the nose of the gouge. So again, I'm going to come up in here, find that sweet spot. I'm locked into my hip with my right hand. Find that sweet spot. If I stop that right there, that's the second pass with that. So rather than cutting like we did on the first pass where I had to cut, it was probably 10 inches of open airspace, you can see on the second pass of this, I'm down to 4.5, maybe 5 inches of air on that side, about the same on this side. So I'm going to pick up this cut right here, same thing, 45, 45, 45, and I'm going to pull up a little bit more. I'm going to move my rest a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and pick this cut up and chase it until I run out of the blank. And it's probably going to run out about 1.5 inches or 2 inches down from the top of the blank. So, even though I could take, and I probably could have buried that wing in there and took that whole 3/4 of an inch of shavings off of it all at once, there was no need to. I can come back in here with my next cut and up and take just about any size shaving I want to take. That round, that's all the bark inclusions are gone. There's just a tiny little bit right there. Now all I have to do at this point is I move my tool rest up and I have to refine this shape now into the bowl that I want to make it. So I got my tool rest up there, check to make sure nothing's hitting. So I'm going to come back up here where the foot of my bowl is going to be. And there's nothing that says when you're roughing along and you start taking a great big huge shaving and that the gouge handle starts jumping up and down, you don't have to continue taking that. Just pull back on your gouge and take half of the amount of that, what you're cutting. There's nothing that says that you have to always take that great big huge shaving. Okay, now this is about the point where I've got the blank pretty well round. I don't have really the form that I want on the outside of it yet, but I want to establish where my tenon, the foot of the, I want to establish where my tenon is going to be. See, I'm using the one way. So what I've done is I've taken my chuck jaws, all my chucks with the jaws, I put them on, I measure them when they're fully closed, I measure them when they're fully open. And when I'm roughing green wood that's going to be turned a second time into a dry bowl, I want to make the tenon that falls at least halfway in the middle of that open and closed range. So for this one-way chuck that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be making about a 4 1/4 inch tenon. You may want to zoom in here for him. Come on the back side, Derek. You have to be careful doing it this way. Some guys make a go gauge and a no-go gauge out of plywood or a piece of MDF. If you're using a set of calipers to do this, you only want to touch the piece on the rest side of the machine. And to do this, I'm going to turn the speed down just a little bit. You reach in here with the calipers, and I didn't quite get it flat enough to where I want it. Now, if I was to touch the back side of this bowl with this point here, it would be the same thing as having a catch, and it's going to kick the calipers at me. So all you do is you just locate with the left leg of it. You can hold the right one fairly close. Sometimes you got to move the caliper one way or the other to get, once the two lines line up, spinning around a circle, you know you're where you got to be. Then I take the point of the caliper, wherever that mark is, and I push it from that mark. I push straight into the piece. And that gets me pretty close to the right size for that tenon. I'm still going to have to adjust it when I get down to that point. But that tells me where that tenon needs to be. So I'm going to speed this back up a little bit. I'm going to take an easy wood tool. This is the only thing I use this tool for is to make tenons. I don't do any rough turning with it at all. Never tried, don't care to. But it works really, really good for making tenons. So I'm going to back the rest up. I'm going to raise it up just a little bit. And I'm going to sneak in there with this. I'm going to keep it in a downhill position, flat on the tool rest. And I'm going to establish that tenon. I'm going to cut down all the way to that stride mark that I made with the caliper leg. And I'm going to stop when I get there. .90 degrees is very important. You have to have it 90 degrees. Now all I did was just made the bottom of the tenon out here flat. I wanted to make sure that I got to sneak in there and clean that up a little bit more.
Size of tenon relative to the piece.
Size of the tenon relative to the piece. Most guys like to make the smallest tenon they possibly can. I like to keep it, the tenon for me is, well, let's back up for a second. The rule of thumb for the foot on a bowl is 1/3 the diameter. So on a 12-inch bowl, you're going to end up with about a 4-inch foot that looks relatively nice. I like to use on the bigger wood, I like to use my one-way chuck, and right now I've only got one set of jaws for that, and their range is from 3 7/8 up to 4 5/8. So I make my tenons to fit in the middle there. And then when I'm green turning, if I can, I will adjust and try and make a smaller foot, take more out of the wall on the outside to try and get the radius to blend farther back up into the foot. So I end up with a smaller foot. Sometimes it works out real well. Sometimes it doesn't work so well. The best thing to do is have multiple different sizes of jaws. I wouldn't want to swing a bowl like this, and I considered it this morning when I was setting everything up. I considered using my Vicmark chucks with a set of number 2 jaws. The range on a number 2 jaw is 1 3/8 to 2 1/2 inches. Well, your best holding power on a set of jaws is at the closed diameter. So if they measure 1 3/8 when they're fully closed, if you made an 1 1/2 tenon on there, you'd have this 12-inch bowl swinging around on an 1 1/2 tenon. That's not big enough in my book. And conversely, if you were to go to the fully open side of that and turn, if fully open, they're 2 1/2. If you were to turn the tenon at 2 3/8 or 2 1/4, the only place you're getting grab on that tenon, that's your tenon here, and your chuck jaw, and you're at, if you got a set of number 2 jaws, and your tenon is turned 2 3/8, well, your chuck jaws are only going to grab with the corners of them, all the way around. And that's the only support you're going to have holding that piece, is the corner of these jaws. So the logical option in this would be use the next size bigger jaw. Use the next size bigger jaw, your tenon or your chucking range changes. I can't remember what the number 3 jaws are for a Vic Mark because they're all in metrics and I got to convert it all. But the obvious choice would be go up to a set of number 3 jaws on the chuck, make a larger diameter tenon than what this is, but closer to where the closing force is on the jaws. The ultimate holding power, like I said before, is when these are fully closed or darn near fully closed, and you've got this diameter rather than being out here like this. The diameter of these chuck jaws is close to this bottom, is close to the diameter size. That's your best holding power right there. 90-degree shoulder, dovetail, squared. That's your best holding, is when your tenon is the same size as when the jaws are closed. So, personal preference, would I have turned this 12-inch bowl on an 1.5-inch tenon? No way. Especially if it's sapwood that you're making the tenon on. Sapwood tends to be a little bit more brittle. And in greenwood, it's even, it's even softer than what the heartwood is. I want more mass, so I use a bigger tenon and then deal with a little bit bigger foot on my bowls. Does that answer your question?
They're asking about the foot versus the tenon.
Yes, my foot versus the tenon. Well, if you go back to what we were talking before, when we make the tenon, you have to have enough bearing on the bottom of the bowl. Here's your bowl, and you want this flat here. You got your tenon flat here, and then bowl coming up. You want the top of the jaws to mate onto that flat. Top of the jaws are what, 1/4 of an inch? So you're going to have whatever your tenon. So I've got on this bowl, on this 12-inch bowl, I got a 4 1/4 inch tenon plus 1/4 plus 1/4. So I'm already 4 3/4 right here. If I use this as the foot of my bowl, just where the tenon jaws are hitting, from here to here, 4 3/4. Now there's nothing that says that when I return this bowl that I can't adjust. Hopefully I've left enough meat in this bowl form to where I can adjust this outside curve, and rather being like this, here I'll draw it in blue for the adjusted curve. So I'll take this outside wall, provided I've got enough thickness, and I can come down like this and make that outside wall come there. That way I can have a much smaller foot. There's nothing that says that where these chuck jaws land, that's got to be the foot, provided you leave enough room on the inside of the bowl to do it with. I mean, if you shrink this down too much, you bring this in here like this, and you bring this back in here like this, and you just clip that like we were just showing. Can everybody see the blue okay? Or does it all look black?
You can tell a little bit.
Okay. There's nothing that says where these chuck jaws come up to the bottom of the bowl that absolutely has to be the foot of the bowl. Some guys don't even put feet on some of their bowls. Some of them are just, they're a wobble bowl. They're just round on the bottom. You know, you got all this extra wood here to play with. Plus, you got to remember, okay, this is a 12-inch bowl. 12-inch bowl. My wall thickness is going to be somewhere around 1 1/4 inches for my wall thickness. That's 10% of the diameter. That's standard for roughing out with green wood. If you're planning on making twice-turned bowls, this is what you want to use. You want to make your wall thickness 10% of the diameter. And you want to try and carry that thickness as consistent as you can all the way down through. Granted, you're going to gain 3/8 or a half inch for your tenon that's on the bottom. This grain isn't going to move nearly as much as the grain out here in the rest of the bowl. This is all flat grain, side grain down in here in the bottom of the bowl. All right, for the most part. Everything up here in the top, that's where you need that consistency to allow it to dry all even. You wouldn't take and make a bowl. You wouldn't take and make a bowl that comes from up here, from a sharp point like that, like this. You wouldn't make a bowl like that. Because as that dries, this is gonna crush in severely on two of the sides and elongate on the opposite two sides, and it's likely going to crack. The best thing to do is keep that wall consistent. And for this 12-inch bowl, it's about 1.25 inches, give or take. You know, you can be 1/8 or 3/16 one side or the other. Be warned though, you can go less than the 10%. If you go less than a 10% and you have a real reactionary piece of wood that dries funny, where the long grain dries more than the side grain or the end grain, that you may not have enough stock to clean this bowl up and get to clean wood when you twice turn it. So try and stay with the 10% rule. Usually there's plenty of stock. If you stay with the 10% rule on wall diameter, you will be just fine. And knowing that, if you carried that 1.25 inches down in here, most guys make bowls around 1/2 inch. You're going to lose probably 3/8 of an inch trying to clean up the inside and the outside, maybe just a little bit more. So you'll have 1 inch or so, or 1/8 of an inch or so to play with. You can readjust this outside curve a little bit to fall outside of where the chuck was sitting. It doesn't, just because the chuck was sitting here originally on the rough bowl, doesn't mean that's where it's got to sit when you return it the second time. You can move that and make that bowl bottom someplace inside the tenon. It's an imaginary line at that point. Good. Okay, so where we were at. I got to finish cleaning up this tenon a little bit because I got a little bit of waste down in the corner. As soon as I do that, wet blank. Water's coming out of it. Okay, so now I established my tenon. I can reduce this. I can reduce this area here, this flat spot, this 90-degree spot, to just enough to let my chuck jaws sit on. I don't know if you can see the pencil line on there, but I left just about 1/4 of an inch there from when I flattened the bowl and made the tenon. So I'm going to pick up my bowl gouge, and now I'm going to start refining this outside. Now there's 3 kinds of cuts, actually 4 kinds of cuts. You can have just a regular straight out, you know, just pull cut, rubbing the bevel, you're taking big hog and shavings off. That's one cut. You can have a shear cut. A shear cut is very, very similar to the 45-45-45. You drop the handle down low, you're riding the bevel, and you roll, you're rubbing the bevel on the piece, you roll the gouge over with the handle held low, and it's cutting. Bring that camera over on this side, Derek.
On this side?
Yeah, bring it over, or actually come over on my left-hand side. Maybe they can see it better. I don't know. Gotta look and see if you can see the gouge. I want them to see the gouge and how it's handled. But I've dropped the gouge handle way down. The flute is not vertical. If you go vertical, all you do is you cut a groove into the piece. So you pull it and you get that flute somewhere between 45 degrees and 90 degrees. And then as it spins, you see these little curly Q-type shavings that will come off. That is a shear cut, okay? And that will clean up. When I start using a shear cut, there's a whole bunch of tear out here in the side grain. This side's got a whole bunch too. I'll use a combination of shear cutting. Remember, drop the gouge handle, ride the bevel, and let it cut like that. Same thing as skewing a hand plane, trying to get rid of problem, torn out areas. And then a shear scraping, you can take this gouge, same thing, you got a low handle, but you take and you roll this gouge all the way over onto its left-hand side. You want to close these flutes down. You can even touch the top flute to the piece, and it will do no damage. You might put some marks in your piece, but you're not going to get a catch or anything at this point. So, same thing. You want to get that flute, the angle of this bottom flute, somewhere between 45 degrees and 90 degrees. Close that angle down, and you're going to run it across there. I don't know if you can see it coming out the bottom of the gouge. But when I'm shear scraping, I get an angel hair fine shaving off of there. That is the best way to refine a surface once you've gotten it close. So there's that. How are we doing on time? Pushing around 115. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a combination of shear cutting, and I'm going to do, along with shear scraping, and I'm going to refine this outside. The outside at this point doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it consistent to help me with the wall thickness. If I don't have this outside a consistent diameter and a nice pleasing curve, then I'll have a hard time with turning a pleasing bowl on the inside. So remember, we're going to shear cut. We're going to drop the handle way down. Going to ride the bevel. I've got that handle locked into my right hip. All right. I'm starting with my weight on my right foot. I put the gouge in and I start traveling with my hips. I'm not moving my hands and my arms. I'm moving my body. Come back, take another bite. I finished up on that cut with all of my weight on my left foot. I still have a little bit of a hump in here. Thing about this shear cut is I can come back in here like this, and I can clean up this little hump right here. There's another little one here. I can pick up that cut, and I can go backwards and forwards with it too. If I want to come back across the piece, it puts little spiral tool marks in my piece, but I can go either way with it if I choose to. The whole secret to making that cut and making a clean surface, though, is you have to drop the handle of the gouge, and you have to have the angle of that cutting edge between 45 degrees and 90 degrees straight up. And you will greatly improve the surface. Sometimes you can get it all with the shear cut. Sometimes you can't. When you can't with the shear cut, then you go with the shear scrape. And it's the same basic movement, the same basic tool control. You come in with the bottom. See, I can touch both bevels onto the piece. I'll put marks in the piece, but I'm not going to get a catch or anything. To do that, get that gouge down low, put between 45 and 90 degrees, and I just barely keep the top wing from rubbing on the piece. And this gouge is not the best for doing this anyway. This is my big roughing gouge, and it doesn't make a very good shear scraping gouge. But for the purposes of the demo, this is 20-30 steel on this gouge, and it just does not get as sharp. It'll stay sharp. It'll have its level of sharpness for a lot longer, but it just doesn't get as sharp. But I can take and I go to my 1/2 inch Sorby gouge.
You want to mention where you're watching too?
Oh yeah. when I'm turning my forms, especially when I'm refining the outside, or basically once I get my cut started, I don't watch the gouge. I'm not watching here. I'm watching the profile of my bowl on the backside. I'm looking over the top of my bowl. I have a concrete wall right in back of my lathe. I'm watching over the top of my bowl, watching that form develop. So I know I can see very minor humps, 32nd or 64th of an inch, humps and dips in there that I can see. And once I get it to the point to where my eyes aren't lying to me anymore, a lot of times I'll even take and shut the machine off and I'll close my eyes and feel with my hands. And that your fingers won't lie to you. Your fingers can feel just a few thousandths of an inch, maybe even less. But I always keep in my vest pocket in my turning smock a pencil. So I'm here and I'm trying to refine this, and I've got one little problem area. And you can feel it. You can feel it with your fingers, but you can't feel it with your hands. You can't see it by looking over the back side of the hump. Well, you can feel it with your fingers. Just mark it. In between them pencil lines is a little hump. I'm pretty good down here. Good enough for roughing, but in between these two pencil lines is a hump. So I know now my fingers didn't lie to me. A potential customer's fingers won't lie to them. So I know I can come back in with my bowl gouge, and I'm still looking over the top of this piece. When you get familiar with your tools, you'll know where and what they're doing. But I'm going to shear straight right here, right where that hump is.
I want to know what kind of brand of gouges you're using.
Right now I got all kinds of different gouges. I've got Sorby gouges. I've got some Hamlet gouges. I got some Henry Taylor gouges. I'm all over the board. I'm not brand dedicated like some of the guys. I want to get some Thompson gouges. I think very highly of them. The couple of times that I've been able to use them, they seem to stay sharp a long, long time. They're really, really affordable. I think a half-inch gouge is $50, right around $50 unhandled. For you newer turners, they're great tools to start off with. I'd sooner see you spend your money on a quality Thompson gouge and buy it once and have it do you a nice job than see you waste your money on Benjamin's Best or some of the other cheap brands of tools that are out there. I think you'll be better served in the long run. One, for their edge retention. Edge retention on them is phenomenal. And he's a good guy. He's a wood turner also. He's not just a guy selling tools. He's a wood turner. It's good to support him. I know somebody's going to ask me, well, what about the Glazers? What about the Glazers? Well, I think I've got, I don't know, if I started counting up all my tools, I probably got more than half a dozen. I probably got close to a dozen gouges and then all kinds of other ancillary tools. Well, if I had to have that in Glazer tools, that would be, I don't know, they're almost $200, $250 a piece when you buy them with the handle. Simple economics for me. Sure, I'm sure they're great tools and they've got a very loyal following for the guys that have them. I don't think you need to spend that kind of money on a simple gouge. There's other options out there that'll get the job done. Well, I'm losing time, guys, and I want to get to the inside, so I'm going to call the outside good at this point. I want to get it turned around. I got to take it out of the lathe. I got to knock the little nub off that I couldn't get with the gouge, and I'm going to chuck it back up, and we're going to start working on the inside. And hopefully I'll get everybody out of here at a decent hour, and we'll still have some time left to grab a 3/4 chisel. Would you please? And a hammer. Hopefully we'll still have some time by the time I get the inside close to being done. It doesn't have to be totally finished to understand where we're going with it. Dress that up for me while I'm changing the chuck, please. And it's really, really handy to have more than one chuck. Keep different jaw sets on different chucks. And I know it's a matter of money for a lot of people, and I understand that totally, but I hate changing chuck jaws with a passion. Get it there? What I like to do, and I've always tried to do this, I put my bowl, now that I've got the tenon formed on there, I got my chuck up.
Question before high-speed steel versus Cryo.
Versus what?
Cryo.
The cryo?
Yeah.
You know, I don't really have an informed decision or opinion about the cryo tools because I don't own any of them. The critics claim that cryo treating provides a more durable, longer lasting edge, and that very well may be true. I don't own any cryo tools at this point. The new Thompson's, I believe he does cryo treat all his gouges. As soon as my condition here at home improves a little bit, I will be ordering some Thompson's, and I'll be able to provide a more informed decision on that. But you know, high-speed steel has been around a long time, sharpens well, and it stays sharp forever. You start getting into some of these funky steels that they're coming out with, and sure, the edge retention, you might have a lot longer lasting edge retention, but it may not get as sharp. The big gouge that I've been using, that 2030 big gouge for doing the outside, it stays sharp a long time, but it doesn't get as sharp as my other Sorby tools. In no way. So the Sorby's just a standard high-speed steel gouge, half-inch gouge. The big gouge is that 2030. Sure, it'll stay sharp longer and require less trips to the grinder, but when I sharpen my tools, it takes me all of 30 to 40 seconds to sharpen my tools. So I don't care if I've got to go back to the grinder more often. It doesn't matter to me. It becomes a non-issue for me. So I like a sharp tool, especially for finishing cuts. Your tool has to be sharp for finishing cuts. High-speed steel gets the sharpest, in my opinion, at this point. Of course, like I said, I don't have, you know, I can't base it on any cryos. So, but anyway, chucking up the bowl, I like to throw my bowl up into the jaws and just snug my jaws, just enough to hold it in there. Bring my tailstock up and just put a tiny bit of pressure on it to make sure that that shoulder seats on the top of them jaws. And then I go through and I tighten the chuck up. Bring the camera around here. Okay, so now I'm going to back the tailstock out of the way, get that out of my hair. I'm going to get rid of the curved tool rest, and I'm going to bring in the big tool rest. I have an inside bowl rest, but I do not care to use it. With the style that I turn bowls in, the post where it mounts into the banjo gets in the way. Now we know for this that my hang on, we're looking for a marker, folks. Everybody good with the demo so far? Everybody taking away a little bit of information? Thank you. Okay, when I split this log in the yard, the pith on this part is right there. On the other side, I did a pretty good job of splitting it. It's right at the rim. But if I spin it back around to the other side, I know I've got a little bit of cracking going on right here. So I want to cut this down to about right there. I want to get rid of all of this pith and as much of this cracking that started because of this pith as I can. So I'm going to reduce the depth of this bowl by about 1 inch. I'm going to do that by using a pull cut. I'm going to put my gouge on the rest and I'm going to pull it just the same way as I flattened off the bottom, the bark side of the bowl before we started pulling up the form. It's going to be the same exact motion. Start in the center and pull back. All right.
On the back side?
Yeah. Over here. Now I'm not going to get my big gouge out this time. I'm just going to use a regular, I guess this is a 5/8 bowl gouge by American standards. In my book, it's a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, but by American standards, they call it a 5/8. So put my glasses on, zip my thing up. And it's the same basic thing, except you're not going to have your tool handle way down. You're going to be more level. You want to cut at or just a tiny bit above center line. You're going to get the gouge started. You're going to roll it to find the sweet spot, which will generally be, if you start with the flutes more towards a vertical orientation, meaning more closed, vertical up and down, than open, then it will be rolling the gouge a little bit clockwise to find the sweet spot, and just make a simple pull cut coming back towards you. So we got that in there. The gouge is fairly level to the waist. Nice and even feed going out. You don't want to speed through it. I'm going to lower my rest just a tiny bit. You don't want to speed through. Your slowest cutting action is here in the center. If I'm turning right now, the bowl is spinning at 700 miles or 700 RPM. That's 700 RPM right here, dead square in the middle. But I have a 12-inch bowl out here. It's going much faster out here at the rim. Just you want to allow the tool enough time to cut the wood as it's making these rotations. You need to go much slower in the middle than what you need to go out here as you get closer to the larger diameter. Tool almost right level, find it to the cut. Find that sweet spot. And I'm just rocking my body. I'm not moving my hands. I still have about a 1/2 inch to go. So I'm just rocking my body. Start the cut, adjust the cut, make it so it works. Find a sweet spot. And I'm just transferring weight from my right front foot. My right foot is forward. I'm right-handed to my back foot. I'm just transferring the weight, so it's kind of like a sway movement. Still got about 3/8 of an inch to go. You can be as aggressive as you can hang on to with that cut. You can be really, really aggressive and take the whole width of the bevel if you want. Gouge gets, because it's flat and it's up here, it gets a little bit tough to hold. If I was to lower the rest down just a little bit more, I could probably pull it off with a great big cut on there. But really, all you're trying to do at this point is to remove the waste wood and get it flat on the top. I got just a little touch more to take off. I've lowered the rest. I've got everything locked in. My right hand is locked into my right hip. Left hand is just holding the gouge down under the rough. Just rocking back and forth. We'll take 2 more passes and then I'm calling that good. All right, that's close enough for now. Another thing I like to do, this is a sharp corner. This corner right here is very sharp. It's like a razor, especially when it's spinning at about 7,000 RPM. Just take it after you face the blank off like that. Take your gouge, lay it flat on its side, and just touch the lower bevel just to the corner. Knock that sharp edge off of there. It'll save you having to go get a Band-Aid, because it will cut you. Now, for doing the inside, some guys teach, well, Stuart Batty does it one way, Mike Mahoney does it another way. All in all, it gets to the same basic finished product is a nice wood turn bowl. It's how you get there in your methodology in getting there. Stuart Batty does all push cuts on the outside. Mike Mahoney does all pull cuts. On the inside, it's all push cuts. You're always cutting from here going towards the bottom, from here going towards the bottom, from here going towards the bottom. That's the way of the world. Mike Mahoney likes to take, and when he does his bowls, he takes a cut here, a cut here, a cut here, a cut here, another cut here, getting very close to his finished dimension. And then he starts here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on that last cut, he's coming down here and getting it to his finished dimension like that. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in that progression. Stuart Batty does it a little bit different. Go figure. They're a riot to watch. If you ever get the opportunity to watch them, I would suggest you get their DVD and watch them turn, because there's a lot of good information on there. Stuart Batty, on the other hand, will take, and rather than do the V cuts down to get rid of some of the mass in the middle, Stuart cuts actually starts in the middle and he works backwards. Once he gets out here to the outside, then he'll take a cut and get to the finished, almost the finished dimension on the wall of the bowl. After he's got that series cut from the center out, he comes back and he doesn't clean any of the tool marks up in here. He just leaves them. And he'll make another series of cuts coming across the same way. And then once he gets to where this cut would be for the outside of the bowl, he'll come back up and he'll pick up this cut here and he'll blend those two cuts. And he does this all the way down the bowl. He would probably do this 3, maybe 4 times on this illustration here. All the way down the bowl, and he blends as he goes and gets it all down there. But he's done, both of them guys, Mahoney and Stuart Batty, have done thousands and thousands of bowls and make their living doing it. So they're very good at it. But just a couple of different methodologies. The whole thing to end up with is you want a consistent, nice, consistent wall thickness. It doesn't really matter. You don't want any tear out, or you want very little tear out when it's all said and done. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start. We want to set up our tool rest so that we're cutting at or above center just a little bit. That's still just a touch low. You say, well, he didn't adjust it but about 1/8 of an inch. Well, sometimes that 1/8 of an inch is fine. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's not quite enough. You want that gouge to finish right on center line when you get down here. Because when you come back here and you're making a cut from out here and you're going to the center, your gouge is going to travel kind of a circular route, because it's going to go, rather than just straight across like that, it's going to kind of make an arc, and it's going to come up the piece and then end up back down on center. It's hard to illustrate with this flat surface, but you'll see as we start turning. To get the gouge started into the cut, you want to turn. The flutes will be to the back side of the lathe, up and down 90 degrees. The flute, the bevel, is going to cut the way that it's pointed. This is pointed at 60 degrees. So if I have this bevel is pointed like this, just use this as an illustration. Let me get my big gouge that doesn't have the background on it. If my bevel is pointed like this, my gouge wants to cut in the direction of the bevel. So I have to pull that handle around and make that bevel point to where I want it to go. And it's not so important when you're just wasting away a bunch of material. It's important when you start working on the wall thicknesses and getting into the bottom of the bowl. The bevel wants to cut the way it's pointed. So if you're trying to cut across the bottom of the bowl and the bevel is pointed back at about a 40-degree angle, and you're trying to cut across the bottom of the bowl, where does it want to go? It wants to cut through the bottom of the bowl and out through the tenon on the other side. where you got to get that handle pulled back, and you have to point that bevel to go, hey, I want to go straight across the bottom of the bowl. So that's what we do. We pull that handle way back as we get out into that bottom and make through that transition that we talked about earlier, and point that bevel where we want it to go. And you'll see as I start roughing how important that is. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start pulling some material out of the middle. I kind of do it across between both Stuart Batty and Mike Mahoney. I don't know if you've seen it as I did it, but I didn't have my gouge number one. I didn't have it grounded enough. I had the bevel close to where it needed to be, but I think I led with the nose just a little bit too much rather than cutting with that bottom wing and the nose all at the same time. That's why you've seen that gouge shoot across. If I turn this lathe back on, and that's what happens. You start cutting with that gouge, it does the tip of that gouge. You want to ground that gouge and get that bevel pointed in the right direction. And then you can let go with the left hand. Once that's in the cut, you can make that cut all the way to the bottom of the bowl one-handed. Other than the bounce and everything, but the left hand's nice just to hold the gouge from bouncing. But ground your hand against the rest and use it as a pivot point to get that gouge nose started. Once it's started, knowing them flutes are 90 degrees straight up and down, then you got to roll that gouge back a little bit to about a 45 degree. There comes that 45 again. And then just feed it. And you'll see I'm kind of dropping that gouge handle just a little bit. Make that transition nice and smooth. And now I know I've got my bevel pointed towards the center of that bowl because my gouge handle is way out here. So I know that I'm going to get to the center of that bowl without trying to do that. If I make that same cut, get it started, I roll that handle, and I get through the transition. Okay, I'm in the middle of the transition. Now, without pulling that gouge handle out, I don't have that bevel to help guide that cut, and I've guided that cut by just using my finger against the rest, but I don't have as nice a cut. So I can come back here and pick that cut up. I like to call with getting the handle and everything, you got to get behind the cut. You can't be parallel with the cut. You can't be in front of the cut trying to cut to the middle. You have to be behind this cut to make it work. That's all there is. You don't get the handle, and you have to have it. Sometimes you have to have a speedy hand at this. So I only traveled with the tip of the gouge. When I started swinging, I traveled maybe an inch, but I went almost, probably 50 or 60 degrees with the end of the gouge handle to get it to come through that transition right. So again, get your gouge out, get your right hand out over the ways, ground your left hand onto your rest. Put your hand right on the rest. Use your left thumb as a pivot point. Get the gouge in the thickness you want, touch it in, and without letting that gouge shoot back, you just kind of push